was indeed Max Verstappen who won for the second time in a row. And that's obviously now, what we now, 4 wins for him this season, I believe, off the top of my head. But more importantly, another dominant victory. Just like in Monza, he was in untouchable form. And the difference is with this one is it was a bit of a street circuit. It's a bit different to Monza, where we kind of knew the Red Bull has a good low downforce package. But ever since they've brought this floor upgrade at Monza, that car seems untouchable. And even Yuki Tsunoda himself was way further up the order. So, Patrick, how much are you looking into this win for Max? And is he sneaking himself back into the title mix here?
I'm hoping that he sneaks back into the title fight so we can have a title fight that isn't ridiculed with just McLaren shenanigans, papaya rules if you want to throw that terminology in there. But I mean, another thing to note too is that even though yes, Monza and Baku are two completely different styles of track, they're still tracks that favor high speeds. Monza is probably one of the highest speed tracks on the calendar. And Baku, I mean, you have that massive, nearly 2 mile long straight that can give you quite a big boost going down that straight. So those are two pretty high speed tracks. I think Red Bull is on the up, but to say that it's basically the second coming of the RB19 is a pretty big stretch.
Exactly. I think if we see Verstappen dominate, and I say dominate again in Singapore this weekend, then I'll believe it, because that is a very different circuit to Monza and Baku combined, and it's not necessarily been his and Red Bull's hunting ground over the years. It's the one circuit on the calendar Verstappen has still not won at. So if they can make it free on the bounce this weekend, then I really do think they are starting to somehow bring themselves into play here from absolutely nowhere. But I think with this win for Max at Baku, Patrick, the difference obviously from Monza is he didn't really have his real competitors close with him at the start. We had a very crazy qualifying, probably the craziest qualifying of recent history. You'd go as far to say, because we had so many red flags, so many incidents and crashes, and a little sprinkle of rain in the mix. But with those kind of final runs, almost a bit of a one-shot qualifying, it was Verstappen who made it count and got that key pole, which basically set him up for the win on the Sunday. But he had the two McLarens and others way further back down the order. And that was the difference, wasn't it, compared to Monza? He didn't have any threat from the get-go, and he just controlled the race throughout.
That too, I mean, the McLaren isn't really a straight line speed car. That's another thing we have to consider as well. So at tracks like Monza, like Baku, and like Vegas later on in the season, those are really just not tracks that suit the McLaren, the MCL39. It is probably the most aerodynamically efficient car on the grid right now. I mean, that's kind of hard to kind of argue because there's a lot of tracks where the McLaren is head and shoulders above anything else. But when it comes to circuits that prefer the higher speed, like your Monza, like your Baku, like I said earlier, like Vegas, towards the final rounds of the season, the McLaren isn't exactly super strong. And even in the race, which I know we'll get to here momentarily, but even in the race, the McLaren's just actually you could even take it a step further and say the entire weekend that McLaren did not look like it was dialed in very much.
And that, I think that was the alarming thing, is that that's the first time now we've seen McLaren have a real bad weekend. Like, they could have sealed the Constructors' Championship, which they'll 99% chance do that in Singapore, but they had an awful weekend in Baku. And I don't know, maybe this is alarm bells for them, that maybe they've been caught up a little bit. I mean, they were the clear, second best team at Monza ahead of everyone else, but just really far away from Verstappen. But then they rocked up in Baku, and they were in the mix during the Friday sessions, if you like. They were still at the front, but then it came to qualifying, and just suddenly that pace slipped away. And it was also the mistakes that really cost them. And obviously, the man who had the worst weekend of everyone in Baku was the championship leader, Oscar Piastri. Had two big crashes that could have massive implications on his championship, or it could have, before obviously Norris, uh, let's say, failed to capitalise in the race, which we'll get onto. But firstly, with Piastri, the mistake in qualifying, I think you could maybe kind of let him off with that because it was slippery conditions, and you do see that at Baku. A lot of people already crashed in qualifying, but the start of the race, he had an absolute mare, didn't he? I mean, jumping the lights and then getting kind of passed by everyone as well, just for good measure. And then, yeah, out of pure desperation, kind of at the beginning of Sector 2, Patrick completely binned it in the barriers, and it was game over, wasn't it?
Yeah, I could say that this is easily the worst race weekend Oscar Piastri has had. And honestly, probably almost since he's debuted, really. I mean, the only weekend you could really think of, like across this whole 3 season career, that you could really think what that would be equally as bad was the start of his Formula One career at Bahrain 2023. That was not exactly a good weekend for him either, but this season, that is 100% his worst weekend possible. I mean, and this is a track that it's not like Singapore and Verstappen, where this is a track where Verstappen isn't exactly good at. Piastri won here last year.
He did,
He
yeah.
got his second Formula One victory at this same venue last year after pulling off an amazing move on Charles Leclerc about halfway through the race. So this is a track that Piastri can do good at, but I mean, if anything, it just shows that he is human and he can make mistakes. He's usually pretty cool under pressure, but I mean, you can't really win them all. So yeah, just a really tough weekend there for the Australian.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. We were kind of looking at him almost a little bit robotically, yeah, for a while here. He just did not crack under pressure. He didn't make mistakes. He was the ultimate consistent driver, and I think he was on for the record for the most points scoring finishes in a row. It was like well in the 30s in terms of the amount of races it's been. I think stemming all the way back to Australia last year or the year before even or something crazy like that. But it's obviously kind of ended that streak, but in a real dramatic way. I think that was what more shocked me, Patrick, is just you wouldn't think that, yeah, with what he's got at stake and the championship lead that he has right now, that he would just make kind of almost a bit of a rookie error. You know, if I could go that far, where you've made a mistake on the opening lap, but then you've got a bit too hot headed and then completely bin the car.
Also, Baku is not an easy track by
Yeah,
any stretch. I mean, if that wasn't a street circuit, he might have got away because there might have been a runoff there. But this is a street circuit. The walls are going to be super tight. It's a claustrophobic track already, and trying to get moves done on this circuit isn't exactly super easy either. There's about 2 or 3 key zones that you really want to try to take advantage of. The biggest one being that massive start finish straight, but yeah, I think he just tried to make a move in the wrong part of the track and then just kind of. He was probably pretty annoyed because his car went in anti stall after the jump start, which
yeah,
really threw him to the back of the order anyway. So probably that on top of it just really didn't do him any favors, really. Then obviously we know the rest.
absolutely. And there was almost, you could say, an iconic shot of him sat at the side of the track watching the race on, I think, Marshall's phone whilst it was going on. And I just think it'll be a learning curve for him, but it's not often you see this. It's not often you see this where a championship leader with a good lead as well. You know, he had about 30 odd points over Norris going into this race, and yeah, just opened the door for Norris to capitalise. But the big thing is here, Patrick, Norris was unable to capitalise. Kind of again, starting in qualifying, where those final runs, Norris made a bit of a mistake, clipped the barrier, and then started quite low down. But then in the race, you know, not necessarily his fault, but there was a slow pit stop, which then put him in the pack, and then he was kind of scampering around trying to get back the positions at the end of the race. And like you were saying, Patrick, that McLaren's not very quick in a straight line, so he was almost on for a thankless task, shall I say, of trying to somehow get ahead of the others that were obviously running much lower downforce.
Yeah, indeed, and especially with the fact that the Red Bull that he was pretty much stuck behind through most of that race was on a lower
Yeah,
downforce setup, especially with that new floor that seems to really help them out on top end. Yeah, I mean it was just really tricky. But even then, there was a lot of periods where he couldn't get past Leclerc for quite a while either.
yeah,
So, and I mean, the Ferrari isn't the quickest car on a straight either, but it's definitely a better than a McLaren when it comes to just overall straight line speed. So it just once again, it was just really a track that just did not suit McLaren. And yeah, I mean, this could have been a massive opportunity for Lando to really narrow that points gap down. But he pretty much, even though he did overtake Leclerc eventually, he pretty much just started or finished where he started.
yeah. And in the end, for Norris, he only gained something like 6 points over Piastri, which is obviously less than if he had won the race and Piastri finished second, which is galling, really, if you're Norris, because it's like this is the big opportunity. I've had the DNF at Zandvoort, which is completely out of my control, but Piastri's had this crash here. It's 3 points up for grabs, but the one time he just could not get just a solid result. He's obviously cut the gap down, but that gap is still fairly big, and he's going to need to keep beating Piastri if he wants to take this championship down to the wire, which it could still happen. But yeah, it's going to be something to keep an eye on this weekend, and depending on where McLaren are in terms of the pace, again, this championship it may be taking another twist just when you think Piastri has got it all under control.